Hey, 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 everybody. Welcome back to Aquarius Rising Africa. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever in the beautiful world you may be. Welcome, everybody. Charmaine, Jelena, who else is in here? Kyle, Lisa D. Nice to see you guys. And of course, we are doing part 2 of The Woman of the Vril with Dr. Dennis Carroll tonight. And next week, Thursday, same time, same place, we're going to be having Jessie the Botar and Dr. Dennis on, and they're going to be decoding The Woman of the Vril and the Vril Society. So that'll be super interesting. So that is one for your calendar. But without any further ado, ta-da, Dennis, how are
Hello.
you?
All right. It's always good to be back again, and definitely I've got a lot of good feedback from the show we did together on the part one of the Women of the Real. So we're going to be doing part two today. So it's going to really go off the tracks here. You're going to get really weird with this, definitely.
Let's
But
get weird. The weirder we can get, the happier we are, because as long as we are not flowing in the current of the norm and what
yeah,
everyone else is following, we know we're on the right track, right?
and my another one of my favorite subjects. I love folklore. I'm big on folklore, and also I've started a new show called Legends of Folklore, and but history too. I love history, and this is a mystery of history that we're talking about today.
Right.
I find this era of World War II fascinating. It's of course I wasn't around when World War II was going on, but it is still fascinating. I mean, we still live with a lot of the memory of that today because our parents and our grandparents were deeply involved in that period of time, and it did. Everyone in the world was affected by it. No matter what part of the
Absolutely.
world you were in.
Still
Yeah,
are, Dennis, still are.
yeah,
How, it's
absolutely. That's what happens with world wars. They affect the world. That's why they call them that. And definitely it did affect our world. And here's the interesting thing about it, though, Shanty. It's still affecting us. Even all these years later, we're still getting the fallout, the feedback from it in many different ways. And that
that's what
includes
I'm
the women
saying.
of the Vril. Definitely.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's it's become abundantly clear, that war A is created by the same people that fund both sides. It really is a way, not just about the blood and energy harvesting, right? But a way to break families up, to get rid of our young men, right? Get their hands on the kids, because that's. I mean, if we look, I'm not sure what year anymore, but they started after the Second World War and the First World War, I do believe, the Lunacy Act, which meant that women who lost their husbands in war were then locked up in asylums because they were then deemed unfit to take care of their kids. They were crazy. They were deemed crazy and unfit. And of course, we know what happened to those kids, because they were then taken and then put into orphanages, and God knows what else happened.
Oh, yeah.
So World War is not just, I mean, and not just the effect of what it has in that time and the decades to follow, but it's the generational wounds that carries as well in the in the bloodlines, your kids and the offspring, because it runs deep, it goes deep. When you are a woman whose husband has come back from the war, highly PTSD, you don't even know who you're dealing with anymore. And I mean, and I know this just from South African women, who've partners
Yep.
have been on, have fought these bush wars for years. I mean, these guys came back crazy, man. And I don't mean that in a bad way, I mean, in an insulting way, but they come back and you can't even know who you're dealing with some days. So it really just has such a knock-on effect in every area.
Absolutely. War is a spiritual thing. It deeply affects us spiritually along those lines, and especially the dark energy of it. especially something with like Nazi Germany, will definitely have a dark spiritual energy backing it up. And we explored that last time in part one about how deeply involved in the occult that the Nazi regime was. And Hitler especially he was obsessed with that stuff. And it all came down to power. They were seeking power and control. And as I've said before, many times before in the past, that is the most addictive thing on this planet, power.
Right.
Yeah, and they were definitely addicted to it. And we will have to do a show in the future, definitely, on getting into some demonology stuff that I'm going to want us to get involved in maybe later on. Because, and I said this the other day, that obsession is one of the doors to possession. And we got to understand that. And definitely, if I could pick anyone out that I would definitely tag as being demonically possessed, it would be Hitler, definitely, without a doubt. And, my own father, who fought in World War II, actually, he guarded German prisoners of war, was part of his job. He always said that he did not believe that Hitler was even ever in that bunker to begin with, because Hitler had several actors that were impersonators of him, that they did that because, especially after the assassination attempt upon him almost succeeded. After that, he had a lot of doubles. And my father always said he believed without doubt that, Hitler, being as smart as he was, as devious as he was, would not have boxed himself into a bunker at the very end there. There's no way he would have done that. So it could have been that he had an actor impersonating him in that bunker, and that he went on to other places, shall we say. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today, because there is some evidence pointing, definitely a strong pointer to South America. And the jumping off place of South America, jumping on to, would be the Antarctic. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, because that's an interesting aspect of this. But at the close of part one, we were talking about earlier, Shanti, the women of the Vril mysteriously disappeared at the end of the war. As the war was winding down, Russia was getting closer, and the United States from the other end was getting in there as well. Britain and the United States were closing in as well on one side, Russia on the other. They were definitely boxed in, so they had a small window, an opportunity to disappear. And a lot of high-ranking Nazis did that. Absolutely. We know that Bormann, I think, was one of them that tried to, definitely. And that, Mengele, Joseph Mengele, definitely got away. And he died in South America. We have a lot of evidence that points to that fact. And who else? He was pretty high up, so who else could have went with him? You got a list of suspects. As they say in my favorite World War II movie, Casablanca, the usual suspects. I love that movie, by the way. It always made, and that's the sort of the legendary side of the war. The legend that's grown up around it was definitely personified in Casablanca. But it has a romantic quality to it as well when we see the history like that. But you've also got the mystery of the history, and a lot of that is more intriguing to me in some ways, because there's a lot of unanswered questions. Where did the women of the Vril go? Maria Orsic, where did she disappear to? And there are a lot of rumors, and I did mention one on part one, was she supposedly got some type of psychic power to live longer. She sort of found the Philosopher's Stone psychic-wise, or she became something like a psychic vampire type thing. Supposedly that she still exists to this day. But there is a little evidence, not a whole lot, that points again to South America. That would have been her destination. And they all went through Odessa. A lot of them departed through Odessa, and which is part of the Ukraine now. It was part of the Ukraine back in that day, or part of Russia to a certain extent, but it was in Ukraine now, Odessa. So there's a very famous movie about that too, The Odessa File, which is really good. Yeah, it's a great movie. So there definitely, that was one point of departure, but there could have been other points of departure that we don't to this day know about. And a lot of historians are still exploring a lot of this. But I've actually seen the secret tunnels under Berlin by which they could have escaped. And the tunnel went all the way through the main thoroughfare of Berlin. and it led. Guess where it led to? Straight to the little small airport that was there. So they had means to escape. We know that without a doubt. They did that, and I think this is what happened with Maria and her gals. They knew when to leave. They knew when it was time to get out of Dodge, and they did. But where did they go, and what happened to them after that? Now we do know a lot went on with Operation Paperclip, and we've talked about that before. Operation Paperclip, which is supposedly tied into the super secret soldier project. But Paperclip was the main way they got all of the Nazi scientists like Werner von Braun. I've seen him in his SS uniform, by the way. And a lot of the other top-ranking scientists, they went after the technology. This was all that really truly remained of the third rank that was worth getting. And that was, they knew Hitler was not high on the list, of course, but it wasn't the only thing they were out after. They said, we got to get the technology here. We got to go after that because that was the main stuff. And here's where the women of the Vril tie into it, as we talked about before. They were supposedly channeling alien consciousness from way out there somewhere. It's supposed to be, I think, around Alderaan, somewhere back in the constellation of Alderaan, back in the Taurus the Bull, actually, is where Alderaan is. When I was a kid, I was always big on astronomy. I always, had my telescope, and I always enjoyed looking at the constellations and all that. And that is one of the closest planetary systems, supposedly, to us, and is in Taurus the Bull and Alderaan. You hear a lot about Alderaan mentioned in Star Wars, by the way. But anyway, that was where they were supposedly channeling this consciousness from. And she was, of course, as I mentioned before, she was an automatic writer. She would close her eyes and they would put a pad of, and a pen in her hand, and she would write. And she would channel this alien presence. And there were actually, Nazi SS men and all that in the room taking notes on this stuff, recording her. And they had a typist in there as recording, taking everything down on what she would say. And she would say it, but you could not understand her. You could read it better than you can understand her, because she was channeling it, but it was just very low, very mumbling, like channeling. So they weren't just listening to her. They were typing everything down that she was writing. It's fascinating stuff. And I have myself, back in my younger days, I have attended several seances. And I've had some freaky stuff happen at some of those seances. We'll have to talk about that someday. But anyway, that was back in my freaky, wild, younger days. I would do a bunch of stuff like that. But anyway, that is fascinating that, that when you actually have a seance, and that's what was going on here, you open spiritual doorways, very much like with Ouija boards that you hear people talk about. And it's very dangerous stuff, though. You got to understand, a lot of people think, it's just, something to play around with. It's something fun to do. And, it's an exciting party game like thing or something. I don't think so. No. You're looking at something that can potentially be very dangerous to you spiritually and psychically as well. And the women of the Vril knew this. They knew they were taking a chance at this, because when you contact the other side, you do not know who you are really talking to. And it's just like, having a romance on the internet. You might think you're talking to a young lady or a young man, and they may be some old, decrepit old man or woman somewhere pulling this trick on you, You can't be sure. You never know. This is very much like what happens in the spiritual realm. You don't know who or what you're talking to.
Dating. Internet dating.
Yeah. They can really pull the wool over your eyes real quick. But now what you're dealing with can be potentially very dangerous stuff, because it's not only just dangerous to people around you, but it can be very dangerous to the person that is the medium that is channeling this stuff, because you're the vessel they're using to communicate and connect with here. And then you're putting yourself in a very grave situation there, because things could go bad very quickly. And the women of the Vril knew this kind of stuff. They were deep into the occult and the occult sciences, as we call them, the dark arts, as some people call them. they were deep into this stuff. And like I said, they were very serious about it. I mean, they let their hair grow long because they thought they were like, an antenna, psychic antenna for them, They believed that. And they were definitely deep into stuff, and they knew what the risks were to a lot of these things. And that is what, we're going to talk a little bit about today, what happened and what was the outcome of all these things. Because when you channel stuff like this, Shanti, like I said, if this were an entity that you're talking to, you got to ask yourself, what kind of an entity is it? Is it something of a higher order? Is it something like what we would call demonic? Or is it really truly an alien presence? Now, here's the interesting thing about it. If you're contacting aliens, or what we would call aliens from other planets, why do they need to contact you psychically? Why can't they do it with a radio? Or why can't they do it with some kind of, technology like that? Why are they doing this psychically wise? But you got to remember the vast distances of space. This would be a smart way to communicate when you think about it in some ways. This would be a more way than using a radio to broadcast, which is subject to sunspots and radio interference and all that stuff. You're kind of bypassing the technology and using the psychic attributes of this. That's very interesting. And look, now you're talking about people back in the 1940s thinking about all this stuff. Okay, they were considering things that we only just begin to understand in our age. They were already deep into this kind of stuff. And here's another interesting facet of it is when you're automatic writing, you go into a level of consciousness yourself. In order to obtain that automatic writing, you have to open yourself up, psychic wise. And back in my younger days, I was deep into parapsychology and all that kind of stuff. And what we used to have, once upon a time, we called ESP, extrasensory perception. Definitely, this stuff is real. We have proved that beyond the doubt of science, that this stuff is real. And the powers of the human mind are nothing to fool around with if you don't know what you're doing. You have to be very careful with that. And I think some of these women of the Vril may have paid a price for that, because there are stories that some of them ended up in insane asylums, that they lost a lot of their own personalities by doing this stuff. And this is one risk that you run in certain aspects of the psychic things that go on. And remote viewers will tell you this, people who do, clairvoyance and all this stuff, they will tell you these things, that you do pay a price sometimes for this kind of stuff. And that's why you've got to know, and you've got to get it down, not just to an art form, but a science almost, in order to be able to handle this safely and correctly. Because if you don't, and the government knows about this is the Operation Paperclip, why I mentioned that, they may have gotten some of these women of the Vril. Without a doubt, they would have went after them, because look, this was something they could use. This was another thing that the governments of the world love to do with their weaponization. And I do know this without doubt, having been contacted by them in later years, back in my own time, in my own, history, that they know about this stuff. They have known about it for a long, long time, and they have been utilizing this stuff. I mean, that's what they told me. We want people who have supernatural talents. And that definitely falls in line with being psychics, okay, without a doubt. And of course, there was a very famous movie with George Clooney, I think it was, the men that stare at goats. And that was part of the experiment, that they would stare at animals, trying to communicate with animals and stuff like that. They were doing all this stuff. Where did it come from? A lot of that had to start with the women of the Vril. I guarantee you it did, because they got swept up in Operation Paperclip along with the Nazi scientists, because the Nazi scientists were working with the women of the Vril. So there you go. I mean, there's your connection. So they knew all this was going on. And if I were a government, spook, I would grab you. If you were a woman of it, I'd grab you. Okay, what do you know about this? Channel some stuff for me, And I want to hook into this alien consciousness too. So what if this were not demons that they were really connecting with? What if they really were connecting with some type of alien consciousness out there? And they were they had evidently, according to the women of the Vril, this alien consciousness knew us. They knew about us. They had supposedly been here before. And guess what they look like? They look like what is described as the Nordic aliens, the tall whites, as they call them. And you know, we had a program about that, the legend of the white gods. I guarantee you this ties into that to a certain extent, because that's the absolute description of these things. I think there was one time Maria asked them, "What do you look like? Tell us what you look like." And they said, "We look like you. You know, we look like you." And she said, "You mean human?" He said, "No, like the German people. We look like you." Now, this was something Hitler would have got a hold of with both hands, because that was an Aryan race they're describing here. And he bought into the legend of the Templar Knights and the Aryan race and all that. He was deep into this. Like I said, he was obsessed with it. He was deep into this. This was right up his alley. And he would have said, definitely find out more about this. You know, if this is an Aryan race from outer space, we want to hook up with them. Definitely, without a doubt. So you have some very interesting attributes going on here with this. And that's what I find, that kind of thing would have been definitely safeguarded, and that they would not have wanted a lot of the women of the Vril to fall into the hands of the U.S. government. So they may have had a way for some of them, like Maria and all them, to get, or did they get away? That's the question. Did they actually, or did they disappear somewhere into the government that we have today with Paperclip? You know, that's an interesting question. But there are a few clues that talk about in some of these so-called secret enclaves of the Nazis in South America. And they have fortresses down there. You can still see the remnants of some of these fortresses to this day. That some mysterious women appeared there from out of nowhere. They came on submarines and all that. And they appeared there, and the trail goes cold after that. Where did they go? What happened to them? And another aspect of all this, did they end up on the so-called secret Antarctic base, supposedly, that the Nazis had? That's another possibility. And there's even more speculation that having hooked up with this type of, now this is getting way out there now, okay? I'm getting freaky with this. This is getting way out there, that they actually may have had a moon base. And that is why a lot of people speculate to this day, Chantelle. And I have actually seen lights on the moon myself that were not supposed to be there. Okay. And a man wrote a book, and I would love to get a copy of this. I know about it, but I never got a copy of it. It's kind of a rare book, but it says, the name of it is "We Are Not Alone on the Moon." We were not alone on the moon. And when they supposedly got to the moon, they covered it up, the fact that there was a Nazi base there. And they had the flying saucers and all that stuff. And they even made a movie on this years later, which was really wasn't worth watching. It was a terrible movie, but it was called Iron Sky, was the name of the movie. And it's supposed to be about the Nazis coming back to conquer Earth with the fourth rank from the moon base with their futuristic spaceships and all that. But the interesting thing is, you got so many smoking guns in this, so many different irons, in the fire, which way to turn with it. But it's fascinating stuff. So, but we don't have any one thing we can peg down and say, yeah, this is what really happened to them. Where did they go? Why did they disappear? Because they had certain information that was very vital to the Nazi regime. And they were actually, and here's how serious they were about this. They were actually taking supposedly some of this technology and putting it on the V2 rockets, the very famous V2 rockets, that supposedly they were wanting to develop a rocket that could reach any part of the world. And here's why they wanted to do that. Hitler could have come out and said, okay, we've got a V2 rocket now that will reach Moscow. We have V2 rockets that will reach the United States of America. They were doing very much like what's going on in the Middle East right now, supposedly with Trump saying, hey, we're not going to let Iran have a nuclear weapon because they would hold the world hostage with it. That's what Hitler wanted to do. That was part of his ongoing plan. I will develop this technology and I will hold the world hostage. They'll have to do what I tell them to, or die. And here's the thing about the missiles back in that day, Shanty. We don't have them like that anymore. We have ICBM missiles and all that now. They can go anywhere in the world. Even North Korea is still trying to develop missiles that will reach the United States. And Lord help us if he ever gets them, and he probably will. But in that time frame in World War II, missiles were very limited. They could barely reach Britain sometimes with some of the missiles. They had to use airplanes, the Great Blitz of Britain, was most of it. But you did have V2 rockets that could do that. They were very close at the end of the war to acquiring a V2 rocket that could go anywhere in the world. That's what he wanted. And not only that, he wanted the atomic bomb as well. Think about it. This was a race of time against that, And that's why we took these people with Operation Paperclip. And the Vril were deep embedded into this to a certain extent. Although you don't know that much about it, a lot of the records have disappeared inside the government. A lot of things that we really don't know about today. But let me tell you this, I guarantee you without a doubt, as meticulous as the Germans were of keeping records, they would film everything too, by the way. They would record things. They were very meticulous. I guarantee you somewhere in the world, those records exist to this day of what was truly going on with the Vril and all this so-called space age knowledge that they were acquiring and where it was coming from. But this is very interesting when you hear that about the tall whites, the Nordics that they call them. And by the way, the Nordic peoples are really not blonde hair and blue eyed. They're more red-headed people. They're like the Vikings. The Vikings were not blue eyed and blonde haired people. Those people sort of come from the Caucasus Mountains, further towards India. In India, there are, we talked about this before. In northern India, you have blue eyed people because you're very close to the Caucasus Mountains. You're very close to the Mongolian desert in that area and there. That is where the original Nordic race supposedly began. It's not the Norway thing, okay? The Norway people are red-haired and brown-eyed people, okay? But the Aryan race that Hitler wanted so much was really more of a legend in some ways to what he had. So here these guys say, hey, well, we look like you. We look like the German people. We're Nordic, we're blonde-haired and blue-eyed people. He was trying to develop his own race of people like that. He was actually deep into genetics. A lot of people don't know this. He had women picked out, young girls picked out. They were blonde-haired and blue-eyed, and he was going to mate them with soldiers that were blonde-haired and blue-eyed. He was creating his own Aryan race. He had a genetic system program going on. It's true. A lot of people don't know about this. Yeah.
Like Epstein, epigenetics, yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what he was doing. And he had plans for this stuff. So you see where he was stretching out with, first of all, get a grip on the world and make it do what he wanted to, and then he could shape the world to what he wanted it to be. These were a lot of the plans he had. These, of course, were definitely the plans of a madman or a demonic inclined person in my book. But anyway, this is what he had planned to do. And that is where these women of the Vril fit in perfectly in the pieces of the puzzle that they were. And so I would think that they were definitely important to the Nazi rank to a certain degree, that they would make sure they would escape at the end of the war. And like I said, I feel my doubts to this day if Hitler actually died in that bunker. We don't have any real true definitive proof. By the way, for years, the Russians said, we got part of his skull, we got part of that because they supposedly burned his body outside the bunker. And let me tell you something. I've been around morgues and stuff. Human bodies are incredibly hard to burn up completely. Okay. I got to wonder about that so-called evidence, because there would have been more than just a piece of a skull. Well, you don't burn a body that quickly, that to cinders that easily. Okay. There would have took a couple of drums of gas to do it, put it that way. Because you talk to your neighborhood crematorium, they'll tell you burning a human body is, science unto itself. You got to do it the correct way. And still, even after that, you've got bones that have to be pulverized into ashes, So it's very incredibly hard to burn a complete human body up that quick unless you've got the auspices to do it. And they did not have the way to do that in a bunker like that. Okay, definitely not. But according to the legend, they drugged Hitler's body out there and doused it with gas and burned him completely to cinders. I don't believe that. But they supposedly had a piece of the skull, and guess what, Shanty? They tested that skull 40, 50 years later, and it is not the skull of a man. It's not the skull of a male. It's a female. Who is that?
What, was he, an invert or something? Either he was an invert, which, quite frankly, I mean, when we see so much of it around at the moment, and we're realizing, especially if these guys were engaging in epigenetics, because a lot of the time these babies are actually transgendered in the womb. So they'll have like a male, let's say male, right? Male skeleton supposed to be male, but then they will chemically
and that
change
ties,
the gender.
that ties directly into the occult. Look at the Baphomet. The Baphomet,
exactly.
which, by the way, the Baphomet is not ancient. It was invented back in, I think, 1850 or 60, something like that. I can tell you the guy's name that actually invented the Baphomet. Now, the actual medieval Baphomet that you hear so much about with a nice thumper and all, we don't even know what that was, okay? But he developed this thing, and if you look at the Baphomet, it's transgender, by the way. It has a woman's breast and a man's body. I mean, it's transgender, okay? This is a big thing in the occult to a certain degree. And, of course, the women of the Vril have known about this, that transgender was what they call fluid. In other words, you could be either a male or female entity, psychic-wise. You're fluid, in other words, okay? So you can be either male or you have both male. You have both male and female attributes. Okay, then they recognize it.
I think that's half of the problem, is because if you take everything that the occult is doing, right, because they're all about matter, right? God is spirit, and they're all about matter. In other words, taking things and controlling it and manipulating it, etc. So,
yeah, according to the view of the spiritual view of these things, you have the male and female attributes. Spiritual wise,
spirit can't be anything other than male and female. So spirit itself, the energy of a spirit can be either or. And that's what they do. You see, it's like they will try and invert everything. So we might think God is a male, but God is not just male. The thought process of God is the creative, which would be the masculine process. But the creative force is the feminine.
Look at God being.
Hang on. Let me just finish. Yeah. So when you understand that spirit is completely fluid, it has no gender. So what they do is they then understand that, right? So they then create that in a material form. So in other words, Baphomet. So they will turn that aspect or essence, if you will, and they create a being that is half male, half female, and both.
What they're saying basically, God is God, the creative force of nature itself, creates not only male but female as well. So you have both of these attributes in the same thing. Here.
Well, the female.
Yeah.
The female is the creative element. You see, we must never forget that. Like Earth is the creative aspect of God's desire to express God's self. So God thinks the masculine is the seed, the thought is the seed, and the feminine, the woman, creates the seed.
He invented that. Yeah, he created that as well. See, that's God. He creates male and female. But it is interesting that he chose the male as his own perspective on it, but I see where you're getting at on that. And you see this show up in the Baphomet, and this is the way the women of the Vril would have thought about it as well, because it was the spiritual aspects that you're talking about. And I said it is fluid. In other words, it goes either way with that. So a lot of times when they would contact someone, they would say, are you male or female? Or, what are you? Are you both? Or you're separate? Whatever, they would ask them these questions. And so when they asked these so-called aliens that, they said, oh, we are male and female. We are like you, And so this is where this really made the Nazis very interested in this, in that respect, because there was that Aryan race they wanted, and if they could hook up with the guys that, hey, we could take over the world with this kind of stuff, no problem at all. If we could get them on our side, we've got another, way to win here. So, and like I said before, they were looking for power, control. That's what it was all about, no matter what it took to do that, But anyway, getting back.
It's the reversal of God's natural law. That's pretty much what Satanism is. It's the inversion of God's natural law. So when we understand, because everything that they do is the inversion of God's natural law. So for me, it doesn't. I mean, it's irrelevant to me how many people have decided to transgender themselves, right? Or whatever. I'm not saying I don't care about it, but to me, it's all that template. It's like irrelevant as to how many, but the fact that they're doing it, and the fact that for the longest time, all these eugenics programs that they've been trying to play with, like, the Aryan race, trying to create the perfect Aryan race. Now we're hearing about Epstein. I mean, Epstein is just the face anyway. The Nazis were never just German, right? The Nazis, American, Russian, UK, everything. At the end of the Second World War, I mean, the Germans didn't lose the Second World War. We know that. We understand where did they go? Yeah, of course. They've been merged with all of that. So, my point really is that whatever they do, it's if they get, it's like they've taken this Baphomet, right, as their icon or whatever you want to call it. And that is in their mind, the perfect balance of the male female energy together. That's why they do it. They've created the material aspect of the balanced male and female together, hermaphrodite or ladyboys or whatever you want to call it, right? But they've taken God's natural law that is, everything is fluid, right? A plant, everything, even though you might be in a masculine body, you have feminine energy. Feminine energy would be your creative spirit, the creative part of you. That's the feminine aspect. Masculine is the assertive aspect of yourself. We all have masculine and feminine within us. That's the thing. We carry those aspects within. But what they've done is taken those aspects.
Usually one predominates the other, though. That's the way that goes in the human system.
It's not supposed to.
Here's the interesting thing, looking back in time at the worship of other gods and all that, back in the Babylonian and Sumerian and ancient Europe and all that, you see a lot of times the femininity of coming out in the worship of the gods. You had, the high priestesses, and a lot of them were prostitutes, by the way, in the temples. That was another form of worship that they were indulging in. But you got to remember this, okay? The goddesses of those times, they represent life itself, the birth of the womb, life and creation, the creative force of the universe. Yeah, that's what that represents, to a certain degree. It's very symbolic stuff in that way. But here's the interesting thing about all of this when you look into this, and of course the Vril were, like I said, deep into this because they were a cultic society. Okay. And like I said, the Baphomet's not been around that long, really. The Baphomet we're familiar with. It was developed at the very beginning of this occult revival that happened with Helene Blavatsky. You remember I talked about her? She was Ukrainian, by the way. She began a lot of this, and she is the one that discovered that Vril thing, that went on. She's the one that got every of this started. And that's where the remnants of the beginning of modern day cultic societies began, with Aleister Crowley and all that other stuff. By the way, Aleister Crowley knew Helene Blavatsky. He knew her well. They were all deep into this thing. It was they had the religion. The name of their religion. The name of their religion that part of it is what you covered just a moment ago is thermo philosophy, thermosophy. And it's very interesting. Themosophy is very interesting concept of that, because it is subject to venerate the creative force of the universe, per se, that way. And, Aleister Crowley was investigating that using sex magic and all this other stuff he was deep into. And so was, guess what? So was Jack Parsons, who was definitely friends with what? Guess who? Werner von Braun, okay? All this stuff is connected, definitely. And the Vril fit in here somewhere, definitely, without a doubt, it does. But here's the connection to a lot of this, and this is what I wanted to bring up today, because this is a fascinating part of it too. Remember how all the Vril thing began with a coming race? Remember that, that book that I told you about, and that this underground subterranean race is plotting to come back in above ground and take over the world again one day because they were driven underground. But guess what? This is what the women of the Vril found out, that this alien consciousness said, we know you, we are you, we have already been there. And so they said, are you connected to the Vril? The Vrilia, that was the Vrilia. That was the name of the people that lived underground. And they come back and said, we are the Vrilia. And that's who they were supposedly connected up with. So this all comes back around in a circle to what the women of the Vril were doing, supposedly, psychically wise. But so the good U.S. government supposedly may have gotten a hold of all this, the usual suspects, as I said earlier, and said, hey, we can weaponize this, or we can do this. And so this leads into the modern era that we are living in now, supposedly, with all the underground bases in Dulce and all of the UFO stuff and the connections. Here's what a lot of people are saying now, Shanti, that the day of the Vril is coming once again. And they're coming back to check on us because they are our fathers, okay? They're the ones that instituted it, and they're waiting to hook up with the Vril, who are underground. That's where all these ships come from. The ships that people supposedly see are the Vrilia, living underneath the earth. And they come out in these ships every once in a while because that's the way they travel. They're not intergalactic ships, okay? They're interplanetary ships. And the Vrilia move interdimensionally. When they do space travel, they move interdimensionally. Supposedly they have bases on Mercury. They have bases on the moon. Supposedly they have bases throughout the universe. The Vrilia is supposed to be a vast race. But here's the contention. A lot of people say they're just taking all this on face value. And here's the disturbing part about it all. Very much like what Arthur C. Clarke said. There are two possibilities. Either we are alone in the universe or we are not. And both are equally horrifying. And here's the bad thing about it. What if the Vril that the Nordics or whatever you want to call them that they contacted, what if they were lying all along? What if they told them what they wanted to hear and not what the real truth was, that they were either demonic or they are plotting to take over the world from outer space once again, and they promised to come back. Remember what I told you about the legend of the white gods? What they always say, we got to go away, but we will come back again one day. So all of this, you got to wonder if it's not connected up. But if they've been told the truth, or somebody been telling some lies around here, that's what worries me about all of it. If it is true and some of this that they did, who were they talking to? And what are the plans of those people or things for this planet? What are the plans for humanity? You got to wonder what is going on here. And does the government know about this? Are they slowly beginning to say, hey, we need to let people know about this, or what's really going to happen, what's going to come down? Or is it all a great big psyop to fool us into believing something that's not really true at all? And what about the women of the Vril? Are they still out there? Do they still exist? Did they actually get some kind of download that they could live forever on and exist as like psychic vampires or something? Who knows? But it's a fascinating wonder. And it's a wonder to me why, Hollywood hasn't latched on to this and done a movie on it yet, but they probably will. Anyway, it's fascinating to think about. You've got so many different rabbit holes connected here Shanty. It's amazing, you know.
I just think, you know, the dark entities. I listen to so many, obviously survivors and researchers, etc., understanding and what they've been through, and hearing all about how these creatures of the night work. And, you know, I think really at the end of the day, Dennis, it doesn't matter what shape or form they take for me. You know, it's like they will be the scariest version of whatever they can be, right? And this is all where our discernment comes in. And I believe absolutely, you know, when we're looking at the Vril and what they do and how the secret societies follow all of this stuff and the horrific stuff they do, right, to gain power and success. At the end of the day, it's all about us knowing.
Well, that's what I've told people over the years, Shanty, and a lot of people I've told this. You know, it's all connected, and people say, "But what's the connection, Dennis? What is the connection?" We are the connection. That's where that comes in at. We are the connection to it all. I just hope that, you know, we're not being led down the wrong path on some of this stuff. That's my worry about it. Knowing the existence of demons and knowing how they do operate, how these dark entities do that, they are all about deception. And you got to remember that. And you can't, it's just like the old legends of the leprechauns, okay? If you caught a leprechaun, the number one thing you could never do was take your eyes off of her, not for 1 minute, okay? If you did, you had a problem. And I think that's the way these go with these entities here. If they, you know, what if they've been trying to fool us into believing something that's not really true? And these things that I've run into in the past lead me to believe that they cannot be trusted, not one bit, not one, no more than I can pick your house up and throw it. I don't trust them. And knowing how they are deceptive in the language of lies that they speak, I don't believe anything they tell me. In other words, I'm going to be like from Missouri. You know, I don't believe it when you show it to me. Until then, yeah, I got my doubts. Put it that way.
I mean, right now, you know, for me, I look at it and I observe, and I don't laugh. It's not like I laugh, but it's like a stage show for me. And it's like you can observe the bullshit that people try and feed human beings and each other to try and get ahead in life. That's what it is for me, actually. And when you are in discernment and in alignment with God Most High, and I say that with intention, right? God Most High, you don't have a problem. You don't have a problem dealing with anything. I don't care if it's a Vril lizard. I don't care if it's a spaceship coming out of the sky with 14 legs on it. I don't know. If you are in alignment with God Most High, that stuff does not affect you. It doesn't even touch you. It bypasses you. And it's up to us to discern what is truth and what is lies. And yes, if we're going to give our power away to those who we think are more smart and intelligent than us, or that I need more money or power or fame because I've forgotten that it actually exists within me, all I have to do is tap into that because God lives within me. And when I choose to believe a lie, I actually move further away because I lose trust in what I already know. That's what happens. So when you lose trust in your inner divine architecture, in other words, your soul, you're going to get led down the garden path. It's easy as that. And when you do, you've got to find your way back. And there are all sorts of creative creatures out there that are going to manifest themselves to you in all sorts of weird and wonderful ways, right? And they're going to scare the living bejesus out of you if you allow them to. But if you are in your divine sovereign light, you watch it like you're watching a movie on the screen. You can see it's there. You know it's there, and you know it's operating because that's what the dark is about. I mean, we living on a planet that are governed by Luciferians. We know that. So how do we think there's any truth and joy and of what they're telling us? We have to discern our way through this. And that's what I find interesting. I love it. I do it all the time. I mean, I could, stuff that I was so raw when I first came in here, not knowing what the hell are these things people even talking about? And for sure, I encountered a few. They are there, but they certainly didn't get the better of me, and some nasty ones as well. And I don't fight. I don't battle with witchcraft kind of whatever. You just stand in your divine light, know that I am God, and be still. Be still and know that I am God. And when you have that and you are rooted in that knowledge, nothing touches you. It like bypasses you. It's like, when you have two magnets coming and just before they touch, it's like, whoop, disappears, like bypasses you.
Negative
So
and positive.
all I can say is the work you have to do is to know your sovereignty. God lives within you, and when you make that connection through doing the inner work, you will never doubt anything again. That's what I can say to people. And I know this stuff is terrible. I've seen, you see what it does to people. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. Of course it exists. I'm saying that if you are out of that fear, and fear, false evidence appearing real, the acronym for fear. And I've been teaching that for many decades now. Fear is false evidence appearing real. So when you tap into that fear, and when you allow it to penetrate your psyche, your consciousness, your awareness, your body, your being, that's when you're in danger of very real, terrible things happening. I agree, but it's up to us. As you say, we are the connection. They're either going to get in through us, or we're going to get a whole lot smarter and outsmart them. So they're going to, that's my take on that.
My own personal feeling, though, I think finally comes down to either you have faith in God or you do not. And if you have true faith in God, He will take care of you. He's going to take care of you. He's going to give you that discernment you need so that you won't be fooled by some things in this world.
When you look within, your faith in God leads you to the fact that God lives within your heart. That's the thing. Yeah. God is not an external force to you. And that's what most people don't get. They look at God as an external force. God is not an external force. You are created from the light of God. We all know that if you're a human being, right? You're created from the light of God. That light of God has never left you. The light can get dimmer. It's like wrapping cloth, right, around a globe, right? It gets dimmer and dimmer. But the light is never gone. All that happens, you've now got to remove the stuff that stopped you from shining. In other words, your fear, false evidence appearing real. So when you know that you are created in the light of God, there is no way that you can even think that God doesn't exist within each and every cell of your body, that you are a co-creator, that just by knowing that, it's pure instinct that propels you forward. You are always talking to God. It's like this, it becomes your inspiration as opposed to your motivation. Your inspiration inspires you. You wake up with inspiration, inspired moments, inspired thoughts, inspired knowledge of what to do, where to go, how to get there. God talks from your heart, not someplace out there. Follow your heart, because that's where God lives. And when we get that, that's the centering force. That's what grounds us. That's what keeps us stable and not let us go flying off into the night sky somewhere and have some bat with big wings do something.
That's why it's important to stay connected.
Yeah, totally. That's the only thing.
Yeah, definitely.
The only thing. But I like it because it's amazing. That's what, to me, spirituality is not sitting in a church and singing Tra-la-la chorus. I mean, if you want to do that, that's fantastic. Knock yourself out. For me, I couldn't imagine doing that. I want to be out there. I want to be enjoying nature. I want to be enjoying every moment of God's creation around me. And I want to revel in that, because that is the true connection to God and nature. Nature is God in action. Nature is the feminine aspect of God. We need both to create. So the thought is God, the physical creation is nature. Nature is God in action. So when we not worship nature, there's a big difference between connecting with nature, aligning with nature, and worshiping nature. You just revel in the moment. It's like watching the sea, watching the dolphins jump. You know those dolphins are there for you. In that moment, those dolphins are there for you, and they have a message from God for you. And if you are open to receiving that, you're going to be inspired the whole day, and beautiful things are going to start happening. You get the phone calls you want, you get the jobs you want, you get the, and people say you're manifesting. You're not manifesting anything. You are just simply aligned with your divine living architecture. That is your soul. That is God. Your soul is created from God. So
what I say a lot of times, I've said this in the past. We look, but we don't see. Sometimes we listen, but we don't hear, and we miss the connection. If we don't, and you have to open yourself up to that. If you don't, if you close yourself off, look how much you're closing yourself off to. And that's never a good thing. We definitely need to work on that connection, but I think times are coming up when we're going to need that connection more now than ever before. In this world that's coming, and the things that are coming upon this world, we've got to be very careful. I think there are things that may threaten our very existence, but I feel that in the end, as God has promised us, you're in my right hand and nothing can remove you from that. And that's a wonderful thing to remember. If we stay true to our Creator, He will stay true to us. And that's the one thing we got to keep working on, definitely. But when it comes to things like the Vril, they were looking outside of themselves sometimes for things that they could have found within sometimes. And I think that's where they messed up. It's very careful. We got to always remember one thing, as I've always kept in mind. You do not worship the creation, you worship the Creator. If you are in line with the Creator, then you are definitely in line with the creation. That's the way that works. But you got to be in line. Okay.
yeah, well, exactly, and that's why I say, exactly, that's why I say there is such a disconnect between that, the Creator, and the creation, because Creator is the thought, the idea, God invisible, right? Creation is nature. Nature is God in action. Yet, what do we as human beings do? We destroy the very thing that we pray for, right? Because if we understand how God creates, if you look at nature, and we live in harmony with the laws of nature, not man-made laws, nature's laws, natural laws.
Well, witchcraft messes things up. Witchcraft tries to manipulate the laws of nature. It tries to manipulate the reality that our Creator has put in place. Whenever you do that, bad things happen. Some things that don't turn out right. So we have to watch out about that. But I agree with you. If you stay in alignment with this, along those lines, you'll be better off in the end for that. But when you start swimming against the current, you're gonna have a problem. That's the way that goes. But
sometimes it's good to swim against the current. You're practicing.
Yeah.
You've got to learn how to swim against the current too. But obviously, when you've done that, you then get in your little canoe and you go flowing down with the current and you do whatever. But as I was saying, it's like, and yet we as humans will come here and destroy nature, right? That's the nature of us human beings as well, to go against the laws of nature.
Yep, there you
So,
go.
yeah.
I talked about that before. We need to do a show on it sometime. There are actual spiritual laws of nature too. A lot of people don't
Certainly.
realize there are actual
Nature is
spiritual
spirit.
laws
Yeah.
in place. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
there are spiritual laws, not just physical laws. Definitely. But it comes back to what Jesus said about God, though, and it's very interesting. God is a spirit, therefore he must be worshipped in spirit and in what? Truth. And that is
I think
very
the way I worship God is just by honoring each and every moment that I live. I love the body that I've received, and the way I treat myself and others is honoring my
honor.
creator every day.
You
So
honor.
that is in my act. I don't have to do it separately. The action, the doing, the acting of God's desire for you and for your life. And when you are already following that path, that is the worship. That is the prayer. That is the life. That's the glory of living heaven on earth. That's what I think it is. Heaven on earth, I don't believe is singing with a choir of angels somewhere. It's actually understanding how the laws of nature work and working with them, and understanding that we are all here to cohabit together. Destroying nature, animals, and each other is going against the laws of nature. I mean, somewhere in my existence, we never ever killed animals. If an animal came to you and it chose to give its life to you, it was never done through slaughter. I remember the animal actually coming to you and it having, like I do, animal communication, spiritual connection, bowing it down, and you touch it in a certain part on its head, and the spirit leaves the body, and the body's left intact. So there's no slaughter, there's no fighting, there's no sacrificing something that chooses life, and that you've got to decide that animal needs to be sacrificed so you can enjoy Thanksgiving. Bullshit. You see, that's where I say we as human beings have lost that connection. And as long
Well,
as we haven't understood that connection, that nature is God in action, we are going to keep having creatures of the night eat our offspring because we eat their offspring. How can it be okay for one and not the other? These laws go so deep, Dennis. It doesn't just stop with repentance. Repentance, what does repentance mean? Repentance goes so deep. It's an entire change of understanding. That's what repentance is. Not just sorry for my sins, and I'll say sorry. It's now walking yourself back from ignorance, because ignorance, divine ignorance, is a sin. If you want to look at sin, divine ignorance is a sin. And many of us have walked away from that knowing. So we have to walk our way back again. That's what true repentance is. You right the wrongs. You understand the things that you forgot or you didn't remember, or you wronged someone else or another. And when we get there, then we as a human race are actually learning how to heal. And that's when we walk our way back out of hell and into heaven again, through the gates of heaven, by remembering who we are. That's what we do.
I remember what old man told me one time since you brought that up. You can put a band-aid on ignorance, but you can't fix stupid. I always remember that.
I
So
know,
what he
I
meant
get so
was
frustrated myself, Dennis. I get so
you can
frustrated.
work on
I get so
ignorance, but you can't do
frustrated.
a whole lot with stupid. That's the problem. But anyway,
Exactly.
yeah, that's interesting to think about. But I agree, definitely it was not meant. When it comes to animals, I agree with you 100% on that. It was never meant for us to eat each other, as
Exactly.
animals, whatever that might be. It's never meant that was never meant to be that way. But it turned out differently. But we were supposed to
We've got
all
to
live in
change it.
harmony. It's supposed to
It
be
turned
harmony.
out different. It turned out different because of our ignorance and
Hmm.
our disconnection. So we can blame the powers that be, the 1%, until we blew in the face for all the terrible things they've done to humans. It's our responsibility to wake up. As long as we don't wake up, they're going to keep doing what they want.
Yeah,
Our responsibility.
what really bugs me, Shanty, is the complete, when you talk about ignorance, it's not just ignorance. It's you can rectify ignorance. You can get smart and do away with ignorance if you get smart. It's just the total disregard sometimes for life itself. Like some of these stupid hunters and all these things that go out and kill wild animals for the thrill of killing something. I never saw where that gets happy at to me. I mean, to take another life. That's but it's the total disregard for that. No feeling, no empathy for anything like that. That's dangerous. We need to watch that. Yeah,
and that's the sin. You see, that's where we as humans sin against nature. Because for me, honestly, to think that a group of men will go out on a weekend, take their guns and their dogs, and go and hunt birds. I cannot wrap my head around that. Why would you ever think it's okay to do that? I mean,
I'll tell you what a lot of it is. Okay, I'll tell you what a lot of it is. Being a man, I can tell you this. A lot of men play that macho game. They feel like they're more of a man when they do that kind of thing. But really, they're less of a man in my book when you do. When you go
like
along
a
with
1 centimeter. Are we talking
Yeah.
1 centimeters? Yeah, exactly. I totally get it. But that's what I'm saying. And then they call themselves Christians. I'm like, where are you? It's like, how? How are you not making that connection? It's like that's where the ignorance is, and that's where the sin
That's
lies
where ignorance goes. That's where stupidity comes out of ignorance at. But let me tell you something about stupidity, okay? And people need to realize this: stupid can also get you killed. It can not only mess up your life, it can get you killed too. Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, I don't know, some men feel like, and some women too have to feel like they got to do a macho thing. They got to, make themselves feel better. But I think it's an inadequacy on their part. They're very inadequate. They feel very inadequate, and they're trying to compensate for that. I guess.
I mean, come and kill an elephant in Africa, why don't you? You can just have like the biggest. Oh no, we had another hunter bite the dust here about a few days ago. South African professional hunter, with the elephant. Elephant fell on him, crushed him. Yeah, and so I keep saying animals are fighting back, nature's fighting back. So all you trophy hunters who want to come here, I'm warning you, don't. Not because I'm going to do anything, but the animals are. They're fighting back majorly now. It's amazing actually to see. I love it. I am team animal all the way. You got to know I am team animal. Yeah. Although I have to say, as much as what I go, yeah, fight back, of course, it's always tragic when someone loses their life like that. I mean, those men who are doing these disgusting things, they've got family.
The bad thing about this world, Shanty, animals and children have no voice, and somebody needs to look out for them, and there's nothing wrong with that. But they have no voice, and really, in many aspects, they have no choice, and that's not good either. And we need to remember that definitely, especially animals and especially with children. Yeah.
All I want to say that is like, if you think you can imagine Jesus climbing on the back of a truck with a high-powered vehicle, blowing away innocent animals, you think that's Jesus, well then fine. Then knock yourself out. Because I always say, would Jesus do that now? If you are a Christian or any type of religion, whether it's Buddhism, Jesus, whatever, if you think Jesus would do that now, knock yourself out. But if you think Jesus is going to go and shoot innocent birds out of the sky with a pack of dogs, then I'm sorry, in my opinion, as I love to say, you're fucked in the head. So this is the kind of stuff we've got to walk ourselves back from. We have to be cognitive of these things. It's so many layers. Anyway, and really, we can think it's all these creatures of the night that have got these dark demons and things that make them do these things, ordinary human beings are very porous and very susceptible to dark energies as well, taking over, I promise you. Even if it is on a drunken night, I've been a healer for 30 years. I've seen some very nasty looking things in the spirit world. That's for sure. And we can't.
We definitely have that card to play on the table there. We can't ignore that. Definitely, but not everything is demonic. Not everything is, but a lot of it is more than you think so sometimes. But you never know. I always say you cannot paint all that with a broad brush. You got to take it case by case. That's the way that usually works.
Exactly. Dennis, as always, it's been cool hanging out with you, and we have you back next week. Dennis and Jesse Zabota, same time on this show, are going to be doing a deep dive and a decode on the woman of the Vril as well, with Jesse's decoding the sigils and stuff like that. So, and the women in the women's secret societies.
Yeah, one of the big signals of the Aryan nation and a lot of the Nazi stuff, I failed to mention that. I think I mentioned it last time we talked about it, is the Black Sun. I don't know if you're familiar with the Black Sun, but actually where that comes from.
I've heard of Black Sun.
Here's the interesting thing with that, and Jesse will probably like this. The Black Sun comes from the Vril. The Vril lived underground, and the guy that was there says, you need to read the book on this. It's wow. It's science fiction, but it's really weird stuff. Anyway, they said the Vril had light underground, and they said, where does this light come from? He said, it's the Black Sun that we've got. That sort of like it's part of the pole of the earth itself. Anyway, was black, but it gave off a glow. And that's where they got that symbol for the Black Sun. And the Nazis took that. And you see it's on some of the Nazi insignia is the Black Sun. It's got little S's on it, and it's a round thing. It's weird, freaky stuff. But Jesse would like that probably. Black Sun. Sure. And that is still an occult signal to this day. Believe it or not.
Well, isn't there something called the Black Sun Ops? I've heard about something called the Black Sun Ops, which is I don't know.
That's part of the supposed to be psyop type thing,
Anyway, well, whatever they are, they all come crawling out their little holes like the cockroaches. Doesn't matter, Black Sun, Blue Sun, Gray Sun, whatever, they'll all come out. They'll all come out. That time will come. I'm looking forward to that. And then all of these shows will never know. We'll always know these shows have never been in vain. All this reveals we've been doing, right? Making people aware. Dennis, thank you so much. I really appreciate you for what you bring to the table all the time, and your amazing research you do, the studies you do, the lengths you go to bring information to us. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Oh, no problem. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah.
I've said so many times over the years, it's one thing to accumulate knowledge, but we need to always share our knowledge with other people.
Absolutely. So where can people get hold of you? What are you up to over the next week? Do you want to just let us know where everyone can go and get more Dr. Dennis? Go and get a double dose of Dr. Dennis.
Yeah, well, I started a new show, which is going to be on Monday. It's going to alternate. I've got two shows on Monday morning. One is called Monday Morning Monsters, and the other one's going to be called Legends of Folklore, where we get in deeper into folklore. I love folklore, fascinating stuff. As a matter of fact, I'm a member of the American Folklore Society, and I study folklore all over the world, not just America, but it's fascinating stuff. So that's my new show I've got started up, and also on Wednesday nights at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I do Hunting the Shadows. And then Friday night, which will be tomorrow night, at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I will be doing Paranormal Point of View. And then started a lecture series on Saturday nights at 9:00 p.m. You might want to tune in one of those one night, Shanty. I do some lectures on supernatural beings. And last week I did it on mermaids and stuff like that. It was really neat. And we explore those very much on that. So definitely want to tune into those. And that's on Saturday nights at 9:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Hunting the Shadows YouTube podcast channel. Also, I have a paranormal consultant agency. I consult people on paranormal problems. If you have any kind of a problem or just want to ask a question or whatever, you can get in contact with me on my website, which is DennisWCarroll.com. And my books are available for purchase on Barnes & Noble and Amazon. Just look up the author, Dennis W. Carroll.
Yay. Well, thank you so much. And we will see you back next week again with Jesse. And then it might be nice to do the mermaids, a show on the mermaids, maybe when we meet again or sometime in the future. Always good to look into the mermaids, right?
Yeah, we might do the mermaids next time we do a regular show there, definitely. And we get into mermaids and the marrow, as they are called in Ireland, and also sirens and harpies and all that interesting stuff. So it's a fascinating subject.
Indeed. Thank you, Dennis. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Always fun to have you guys hanging out with us on a Thursday night. Take it easy. Take care of your beautiful selves. I will see you tomorrow on Drop In with Shanti. And not on the weekend, I don't think. I've got weekend off this weekend. But I will see you back next week. Take care, everybody. God bless you all. And if you can't be cool, just be kind. If this broke something open, if you recognized yourself in the testimony, if your body responded before your mind understood, the next step isn't more information. It's pattern work. Decode what your nervous system built to survive. Dismantle the story that keeps it running. Reorganize through the body and choose from the person you're becoming, not from the pattern that formed when you were too small to choose. That's Solutions. Link below. The body is the record. Let's listen.